The most dangerous lies are the ones hidden inside genuine concern. That is something I learned on a rainy Thursday evening when my wife walked through our front door looking pale, exhausted, and barely able to keep her eyes open. My name is Ryan Parker. I was 42 years old, married for 11 years, and until that night, I thought I understood the difference between a problem and a mystery. A problem has an explanation. A mystery only has questions. Megan arrived home around 7:30. The moment I saw her, I stood up from the couch. She dropped her purse beside the entry table and leaned against the wall as though she had just finished running a marathon. Her face looked drained of color. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Even her movements seemed slower than usual. "Are you okay?" I asked. She forced a weak smile. "I think I caught some kind of flu." I immediately walked over and placed my hand against her forehead. She did feel warm. Not alarmingly hot, but warmer than normal. "You should sit down," I said. Megan nodded and moved toward the kitchen table. As she sat, she closed her eyes for several seconds. I felt a surge of concern. Whatever was bothering her seemed real. During our marriage, Megan rarely complained about being sick. She was the type of person who worked through headaches, ignored minor colds, and insisted she was fine even when she clearly was not. Seeing her like this immediately triggered every protective instinct I had. I poured a glass of water and placed it in front of her. "Did this start today?" I asked. "A couple of days ago." The answer surprised me. "Why did you not tell me?" She shrugged. "I thought it would pass." I accepted the explanation without hesitation, at least at first. The evening continued quietly. I made soup. Megan barely touched it. She spent most of the time wrapped in a blanket on the couch while I handled the dishes and straightened up the kitchen. Every few minutes I asked if she needed anything. Every time she gave the same answer. "I am fine." Around 9 o'clock, she stood and announced she was going upstairs. "I just want to sleep." "Do you need me to call a doctor tomorrow?" I asked. "No." The answer arrived a little too quickly. "Let me see how I feel in the morning." Again, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? Sick people often prefer rest before medical appointments. After she disappeared upstairs, I finished cleaning and eventually headed to bed myself. That should have been the end of an ordinary evening. Instead, it became the beginning of everything. Around midnight, I woke up briefly. The bedroom was dark except for the glow of a digital clock on Megan's side table. As I shifted beneath the blankets, I noticed movement. Megan was awake. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at something in her hands. For a moment, I thought she was checking her phone. Then she quickly slipped the object into her nightstand drawer. She must have noticed me moving because she turned immediately. "Did I wake you?" she asked. Her voice sounded calm, but there was something else there too. Tension. "No," I mumbled. "Just rolled over." She nodded and closed the drawer. A few seconds later, she turned off the lamp and climbed back into bed. The entire moment lasted less than 15 seconds. Under normal circumstances, I would have forgotten it by morning. But something about it lingered. Not because hiding things in a drawer was unusual. Everyone stores personal items. What caught my attention was the speed of her reaction. It looked less like someone putting something away and more like someone making sure it was not seen. The next morning, Megan still appeared tired. She moved slowly through the kitchen while getting ready for work. I expected her to stay home. Instead, she insisted she needed to attend an important meeting. "You do not look well," I told her. "I will be okay." Again, the response came quickly. Too quickly. Before leaving, she grabbed her purse from the counter. As she did, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. Megan reacted instantly. She bent down, picked it up, and tucked it into her purse before I could read a single word. Then she smiled awkwardly. "Just paperwork." I nodded. Yet for the first time since she came home sick, a small question formed in the back of my mind. Why was she acting so protective about ordinary paperwork? After she left, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the empty driveway. Concern remained my strongest emotion. My wife seemed genuinely unwell. That much was obvious. Still, another feeling had begun quietly growing beneath the surface. Confusion. Because over the past 12 hours, I had noticed several small things that did not fit together. None of them seemed important on their own. The hidden item in the drawer, the folded paper, the unusual hesitation whenever doctors were mentioned. Tiny details. Meaningless details. At least that is what I told myself. What I did not know was that one of those tiny details would soon connect to a phone call, a sealed envelope, and a truth none of us were prepared to hear. The strange thing about concern is that it can quietly transform into curiosity without you realizing it. For the rest of that day, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Megan. She looked genuinely ill. That part was obvious. Yet every time I remembered the folded paper slipping from her purse or the way she immediately dismissed the idea of seeing a doctor, the same question returned. What exactly was she trying to hide? By late afternoon, I convinced myself I was overthinking everything. People value privacy. Medical issues can be personal. Maybe she simply did not want to discuss details until she understood what was happening. That explanation seemed reasonable enough. Unfortunately, it lasted less than an hour. Around 5:30, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen expecting a message from Megan. Instead, I saw an unknown number. Normally, I ignored unfamiliar calls. Something made me answer anyway. Hello. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then a woman's voice came through the speaker. Calm, careful, almost hesitant. Is this Ryan Parker? Yes. Another brief pause followed. I hope this does not sound strange, but I need to ask you something. Her tone immediately caught my attention. This was not a sales call. This was not a wrong number. Whoever she was, she sounded nervous. Okay, I said cautiously. Have you spoken to your wife today? The question felt oddly specific. Yes. Did she tell you where she was yesterday afternoon? I frowned. Who is this? The woman exhaled slowly. My name is Claire Donovan. The name meant nothing to me. Why are you asking about my wife? Again, silence. Then she spoke words that stayed with me long after the call ended. Because I think our lives may be connected in a way neither of us understands yet. Before I could respond, she apologized for calling unexpectedly. She told me she would contact me again soon and ended the conversation. Just like that. No explanation. No details. Nothing. I stared at my phone for nearly a minute. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet it left me with more questions than answers. Who was Claire Donovan? How did she know my name? Why was she asking about Megan? Most importantly, what did she mean when she said our lives were connected? During the drive home, I replayed every word. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had constructed at least a dozen possible explanations. Maybe Claire worked with Megan. Maybe there had been some administrative mistake. Maybe she simply confused my wife with someone else. Yet none of those possibilities felt right. The certainty in her voice suggested she knew exactly who she was calling. Inside the house, Megan was already home. She sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of tea. Her appearance had improved slightly since the previous night, but she still looked tired. How are you feeling? I asked. Better. The answer arrived quickly. She offered a faint smile. Not great. Better. I nodded and joined her at the table. For several minutes we discussed ordinary things. Grocery shopping, weekend plans, a project deadline at my office. The conversation felt almost normal until I noticed something unusual. Megan kept checking her phone. Not constantly, just often enough to stand out. Every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the screen. Then she would lock it and return to the conversation. Eventually, a notification appeared. The screen illuminated briefly before she flipped the phone over. Her reaction happened so fast it felt automatic. Once again, a tiny detail lodged itself in the back of my mind. Later that evening, Megan went upstairs to shower. While clearing the dinner table, I noticed her purse sitting on a nearby chair. The same purse from that morning. The same purse containing the folded paper. For several seconds, I simply looked at it. I had never searched through Megan's belongings. Not once during our entire marriage. The idea made me uncomfortable. So I turned away and continued cleaning. Yet as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher, another memory surfaced. Claire's voice. Have you spoken to your wife today? Suddenly, the folded paper felt less like a private medical document and more like a missing piece of a puzzle. I still resisted the urge. Trust mattered. Boundaries mattered. But fate intervened before I had to make a decision. When Megan came downstairs an hour later, she carried her purse toward the bedroom. As she passed the hallway table, another sheet of paper slipped out and floated gently onto the floor. This time she did not notice. I watched silently as she disappeared around the corner. Then I walked forward and picked it up. The page was folded twice. At the top, I saw a medical clinic logo. Beneath it sat several printed lines of information. Before I could read further, Megan's voice echoed from the hallway. Ryan. My heart jumped. Instinctively, I folded the paper and held it at my side. Yeah. Have you seen my purse? I looked down at the document in my hand, then toward the hallway where my wife waited. At that exact moment, standing alone between a mysterious phone call and a medical document that clearly mattered far more than I understood, I realized the simple explanation I had been hoping for was beginning to disappear. I stood there holding the folded document while Megan searched for her purse in the hallway. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The medical paper rested in my hand. One glance could potentially answer questions that had been building for days. Yet reading it felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. Then Megan called my name again. Ryan. I quickly folded the document and slipped it back into the purse before she returned. A second later, she appeared around the corner. There it is, she said, spotting the purse on the chair. I forced a smile. You were looking for this? Yeah. She picked it up immediately. Again, I noticed how protective she seemed whenever paperwork was involved. Not angry, not defensive, careful, almost nervous. The feeling stayed with me long after we went to bed. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Megan was still asleep beside me. Normally, I would have remained in bed for another hour, but my mind refused to settle. Claire's phone call continued echoing through my thoughts, especially one sentence. I think our lives may be connected in a way neither of us understands yet. What kind of person says something like that and then disappears? Around 8:30, while I was reviewing emails at work, my phone rang again. The same unknown number appeared on the screen. This time I answered immediately. Ryan speaking. It is Claire. Her voice sounded calmer than before, more certain. I owe you an explanation. I leaned back in my chair and closed my office door. I think so. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Claire surprised me with her first question. Has your wife shown you any medical paperwork recently? Every muscle in my body seemed to tense at once. Why would you ask that? Another pause. Because if she has not shown it to you, she probably does not intend to. The statement landed heavily. What exactly is going on? I asked. Claire sighed. I would rather explain this in person. Explain what? Everything. Her answer only increased my frustration. You keep saying things like that, but you are not actually telling me anything. I know, she said softly. And I am sorry. But there are things I need you to see for yourself. The conversation lasted another 10 minutes. Yet when it ended, I still lacked a clear explanation. Claire refused to discuss details over the phone. Instead, she asked if we could meet later that week. Reluctantly, I agreed. After hanging up, I stared at my desk in silence. Rationally, I knew I should tell Megan about the calls. Spouses do not normally hide conversations with strangers. Yet something stopped me. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was instinct. Either way, I said, nothing. That evening, Megan appeared slightly healthier than before. The color had returned to her face. She ate dinner normally for the first time all week. Watching her laugh at a television commercial, it became difficult to reconcile the woman sitting across from me with the growing mystery surrounding her. Maybe Claire was mistaken. Maybe this entire situation had an innocent explanation. I desperately wanted that to be true. Then another strange detail appeared. Around 9 o'clock, Megan received a text message. I was not trying to look at her phone, but the screen illuminated while it rested on the couch cushion between us. The preview displayed only a few words before disappearing. One word caught my attention immediately. Results. Megan grabbed the phone so quickly that the movement felt almost automatic. She read the message, stood up, and walked toward the kitchen. When she returned a few minutes later, her expression had changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. She looked worried. Later that night, after she went upstairs, I found myself sitting alone in the dark living room. The house felt unusually quiet. My eyes drifted toward the front window where rain tapped softly against the glass. Then my phone vibrated again. Another message from Claire. This time it was short. One sentence. We need to meet before she receives the envelope. I read it twice. Then 3 times. The envelope. Suddenly my mind returned to the medical paperwork. The folded document. The text mentioning results. Everything seemed connected, yet I still could not see the complete picture. I typed a response. What envelope? Claire answered almost immediately. The one that explains everything. The message ended there. No details. No clarification. Just another piece of a puzzle that refused to make sense. I sat motionless for several minutes staring at those words. Somewhere between concern for my wife and confusion about Claire's involvement, I had crossed into completely unfamiliar territory. The mystery was no longer about whether Megan was sick. It was about why multiple people seemed to know something important before I did. And as thunder rolled softly in the distance beyond the rain-covered windows, I realized I was only one step away from discovering whatever truth everyone else appeared to be protecting. I agreed to meet Claire 3 days later. The decision felt strange from the moment I made it. I was about to sit down with a woman I had never met because she claimed our lives were connected by a secret she refused to explain over the phone. If someone had described the situation to me a month earlier, I would have called it ridiculous. Yet here I was counting the hours until a conversation I both dreaded and desperately needed. The meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at a quiet coffee shop nearly 20 minutes from my neighborhood. Claire insisted on a public place. That alone made me slightly more comfortable. At least whatever she wanted to discuss was important enough to handle carefully. When Saturday arrived, Megan seemed noticeably better. She spent the morning cleaning the house while listening to music. Looking at her, it became difficult to believe she had been wrapped in blankets just days earlier. Before leaving, I told her I was meeting a client regarding a construction project. The lie bothered me immediately. Yet after weeks of unanswered questions, I felt trapped by circumstances I did not create. Claire was already seated when I arrived. She looked to be around 40 years old. Professional. Composed. Not at all what I expected. She stood and shook my hand. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from her. "You said you had answers." Claire nodded slowly. Then her expression shifted. Not fear. Not anxiety. More like disappointment. The look of someone who wished they were wrong about something. "Before we talk," she said, "I need to ask you one question." I leaned forward slightly. "Okay. Has Megan received a large envelope from a medical clinic yet?" There was that word again. Envelope. My stomach tightened. "No." Claire looked relieved. "Good. Why?" She reached into her bag and removed a sealed manila envelope. For several seconds, she simply held it in her hands. My eyes remained fixed on it. Every instinct told me the contents mattered. "What is that?" I asked. Claire looked directly at me. "The reason I called." The coffee shop suddenly felt quieter. Conversations from nearby tables faded into the background. All my attention focused on the envelope resting between us. Yet Claire did not hand it over. Not immediately. Instead, she began explaining how she became involved. Her husband, Jason Donovan, worked for a regional healthcare company. Several weeks earlier, unusual circumstances surrounding paperwork and appointment records caught her attention. She emphasized that she had not been investigating anyone. She simply noticed inconsistencies that eventually became impossible to ignore. As she spoke, I struggled to follow every detail. Not because she was unclear, because my mind kept returning to the same question. What was inside the envelope? Finally, I asked directly, "Does this have something to do with Megan?" Claire nodded. "Yes." "Is she seriously ill?" For the first time since the conversation began, genuine sympathy crossed Claire's face. "No." Relief flooded through me, so suddenly I almost laughed. For days I had worried about that possibility. Hearing the answer felt like removing a weight from my chest. Yet Claire's expression remained serious. Too serious. "Then what is this about?" I asked. She carefully slid the envelope across the table. "I think you should see it for yourself." My hands felt strangely unsteady as I picked it up. The envelope was sealed. Official clinic markings appeared in one corner. Megan's name was printed on the front. Seeing it there transformed the situation from an abstract mystery into something undeniably real. For several seconds, I simply stared. "Why do you have this?" Claire looked away briefly before answering. "Because my husband was connected to the situation." The statement created more questions than answers. Connected how? Another pause. "That part will make sense after you read it." I wanted immediate clarification. Instead, I found myself slowly opening the envelope. Papers slid onto the table. Several pages. Medical forms. Appointment summaries. Laboratory information. At first glance, the terminology meant very little to me. I was not a doctor. I was not even particularly knowledgeable about healthcare paperwork. Yet one thing became obvious almost immediately. The documents did not describe a flu. They did not describe a virus. They did not describe anything Megan had told me. Claire remained silent while I reviewed the pages. The longer I looked, the more confused I became. Certain sections appeared highlighted. Dates were circled. Notes were attached. Everything seemed intentionally organized so that a specific conclusion would become clear. Unfortunately, I still could not see it. Finally, I looked up. I do not understand. Claire nodded slowly. I know. Then she said something that instantly changed the atmosphere at the table. That is because you are reading the results. What matters is who was there when those results were created. My pulse quickened. What does that mean? Claire took a deep breath. For a moment, she seemed to be gathering the strength to say something she had been carrying for a long time. Then she looked directly at me and spoke the sentence that would begin unraveling everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Ryan, before I explain the medical results, you need to understand why my husband and your wife kept appearing in the same records. For several seconds after Claire finished speaking, I could only stare at her. The coffee shop around us continued operating normally. Cups clinked against tables. People laughed quietly in nearby conversations. A barista called out drink orders from behind the counter. Yet everything felt distant. My entire focus narrowed to one statement. My husband and your wife kept appearing in the same records. I looked down at the paperwork again. Suddenly the dates felt more important. The highlighted sections felt more important. Every detail I previously failed to understand now seemed connected to a larger story. Are you saying Megan knows your husband? I asked. Claire nodded slowly. Yes. The answer arrived without hesitation. How well? Her expression tightened. That is the question I spent weeks trying to answer myself. I leaned back in my chair. The knot in my stomach grew heavier. Even then, I resisted jumping to conclusions. Adults know other. Adults. Professional connections exist. Shared appointments can happen for innocent reasons. Yet Claire's face told me she was not describing a coincidence. She reached into her bag and removed another folder. This one was noticeably thicker. Inside were printed emails, appointment confirmations, and scheduling records. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing dramatic. Just documentation. Dates. Times. Locations. Viewed separately, each item seemed harmless. Viewed together, they painted a pattern. The same pattern Claire had apparently been studying for weeks. I did not start looking because I suspected anything, she explained. At first I thought there was a paperwork error. I listened carefully. According to Claire, irregularities appeared when appointment records repeatedly linked Megan and Jason to overlapping schedules. Not identical appointments. Not identical treatments. Just repeated intersections that should not have existed. One or two could have been random. The number she eventually found was much harder to dismiss. How many times? I asked quietly. Claire opened the folder and pointed to a list. I counted 8 separate dates over the previous 7 months. 8. The number itself was not shocking. The consistency was. I immediately thought about Megan's work schedule during those months. Late meetings. Networking events. Occasional weekend obligations. All ordinary explanations. At least on the surface. Claire watched me process the information before continuing. I confronted Jason 3 weeks ago. My eyes lifted immediately. What happened? He denied everything. The answer was predictable. Did you believe him? Claire laughed softly. Not because anything was funny. Because the question no longer had meaning. At first, maybe. Then she looked directly at me. Not anymore. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Eventually, I returned my attention to the medical documents. I still do not understand what the results have to do with any of this. Claire nodded. That is because the results themselves are not the important part. She pointed toward a highlighted section near the bottom of one page. Look at the date. I did. The appointment occurred 6 days before Megan came home claiming she was sick. Another date appeared 3 days later. Then another. A sequence. Follow-up visits. Additional testing. Professional consultations. Suddenly the timeline became visible. Whatever was happening had been happening for weeks. Maybe months. The illness story I received was not the beginning. It was the continuation of something already underway. Why would she hide this? I asked. Claire looked down at her coffee cup. Probably for the same reason my husband hid things from me. The statement landed heavily. Not because she explicitly accused anyone. Because she did not need to. By now, the implication existed whether either of us wanted it to or not. Then Claire said something that changed the entire conversation. Ryan, there is one more thing. I looked up. Her expression had become unusually serious. The envelope that Megan is waiting for has not arrived yet. You said that before. Because it matters. She slid another document across the table. This one was a shipping notification. Certified delivery. Scheduled for Monday. My pulse quickened. Monday was only 2 days away. What is inside? Claire hesitated. For the first time since we met, she appeared genuinely uncertain. I cannot prove exactly what it says, but I know why they are both afraid of it. The word both caught my attention immediately. Not Megan, not Jason, both. Whatever existed inside that envelope apparently threatened more than one person. We sat in silence for several seconds. Then my phone vibrated unexpectedly on the table. The screen illuminated. Megan's name appeared. A simple text message. Where are you? The timing felt almost surreal. Claire noticed my expression. Is it her? I nodded. Another message arrived immediately afterward. Everything okay? I stared at the screen. Ordinary questions from a spouse. Yet after everything I had learned that morning, they felt strangely different. For weeks I had worried about Megan's health. Then I worried about her secrecy. Now I found myself wondering whether she was worried about something entirely different. I slowly locked the phone and slipped it into my pocket. Claire watched without speaking. Finally, she leaned forward and said the sentence that stayed with me throughout the entire drive home. When that envelope arrives, nobody is going to be able to control the story anymore. As I left the coffee shop carrying copies of records I never expected to see, one realization followed me into the parking lot. For weeks, I believed the mystery centered around an illness. Now it was becoming painfully clear that the illness was only the excuse. The real story was hidden somewhere inside a package scheduled to arrive on Monday morning. For several seconds after Megan spoke, neither of us moved. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while the paperwork remained untouched on the coffee table between us. Her statement repeated in my mind. The results are not what frightened me. The fact that someone else already knew them. Everything suddenly felt different. Until that moment, I believed the mystery revolved around medical information. Now it seemed the real mystery involved how that information traveled from one life into another. What do you mean? I finally asked. Megan lowered her eyes toward the documents. I mean, somebody should not have known any of this. Her voice sounded exhausted. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. Then how did Claire know? The moment I mentioned Claire's name, Megan looked up sharply. Surprise flashed across her face. You have spoken to her. It was not a question. I nodded. For several seconds, she simply stared at me. Then she leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes. I was wondering when that would happen. The answer caught me off guard. You knew she contacted me? Not at first. Megan sighed. But I suspected she eventually would. Suddenly, another piece of the puzzle shifted. For weeks I had been trying to determine who knew what. Now it appeared everyone understood more than I realized. Everyone except me. Then start explaining, I said quietly. Megan looked toward the paperwork again. Several months ago, I started having recurring health concerns. Nothing dramatic. Just enough that my doctor recommended additional testing. I listened carefully. This part aligned with what I already knew. The appointments. The follow-up visits. The timeline Claire showed me. At first I kept it private because I did not want to worry you. Another explanation. Another decision made without me. Yet this one felt different. More believable. Then the testing continued, she said. And eventually, I found myself spending time around people connected to the same healthcare network. My attention sharpened immediately. Including Jason Donovan? Megan hesitated. The silence answered before her words did. Yes. There it was. The connection. Not fully explained. Not yet. But finally acknowledged. My pulse quickened. How? Megan rubbed her forehead. Through appointments. Through referrals. Through discussions about treatment options. The same circles. The same facilities. The same specialists. Part of me wanted to believe that explanation solved everything. Another part remembered Claire's folders filled with overlapping dates. That does not explain why everyone was hiding things. Megan looked away. Because it stopped being simple. The sentence hung heavily between us. I waited. Eventually, she continued. Ryan, once Claire started asking questions, everything became complicated. I frowned. Why would she ask questions? Megan swallowed hard. Because she started noticing patterns too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt strangely quiet despite the storm outside. Then Megan reached for one of the pages resting on the table. Her fingers trembled slightly. The results themselves were never catastrophic. She tapped the document. The problem was what people assumed those results meant. Finally, we were approaching the center of the mystery. Assumptions. Interpretations. Conclusions. Suddenly Claire's behavior made more sense. She had not simply discovered information. She had constructed a story around it. Whether that story was true remained unclear. What exactly did she assume? I asked. Megan stared at me for several seconds before answering. That Jason and I were hiding something together. The words landed heavily. Not because they confirmed anything, because they echoed every fear that had quietly grown inside me over the past several weeks. Megan immediately continued. And once she believed that, every coincidence started looking intentional. I thought back to Claire's records, the overlapping appointments, the repeated dates, the shared healthcare network. Through that lens, I could understand how suspicion might develop. Yet one question remained. Why not tell me all of this from the beginning? Megan laughed softly. It was not a happy sound. Because every week I waited made it harder. That answer felt painfully familiar. Small secrets becoming larger problems. Delayed conversations creating bigger consequences. I had seen that pattern before. Then Megan said something unexpected. The envelope actually proves something important. I looked at the documents. What? She slowly slid one page toward me. It proves the assumptions were wrong. My eyes moved across the paperwork. Medical terminology. Dates. Notes. Information I still struggled to fully understand. Yet Megan's confidence sounded genuine for the first time in weeks. Not the confidence of someone hiding. The confidence of someone waiting to be believed. Then why were you so afraid of it arriving? I asked. Tears appeared in her eyes again. Because I knew nobody would wait long enough to hear the explanation. The answer lingered between us as thunder rolled outside. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt the story changing direction again. The illness had not been the truth. The appointments had not been the truth. Even the suspicions might not be the truth. Somewhere underneath all of it existed a deeper explanation connecting Megan, Jason, Claire, and the results everyone seemed to interpret differently. And as I looked at the documents spread across the coffee table, I realized the real problem was no longer discovering information. The real problem was determining which version of that information actually reflected reality. After our conversation that night, sleep became impossible. Megan went upstairs shortly before midnight, but I remained in the living room staring at the stack of documents spread across the coffee table. The storm outside had finally passed, leaving the neighborhood quiet and still. For the first time in weeks, I felt as though I was standing near the center of the mystery instead of chasing it from behind. Yet the closer I got, the more complicated everything seemed to become. Claire believed the records revealed one story. Megan insisted they revealed another. Both women sounded sincere. Both possessed evidence. And somehow I was expected to determine which version reflected reality. The following morning, I received another message from Claire. It contained only 6 words. We need to discuss Jason. My stomach tightened immediately. Throughout this entire situation, Jason Donovan remained the missing piece. His name appeared in records. His schedule overlapped with Megan's. His wife believed he was hiding something. Yet I had never spoken to him directly. I stared at the message for several minutes before replying. When? Claire answered almost immediately. Today if possible. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from Claire once again in the same coffee shop. This time she appeared more exhausted than before. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. A half-finished coffee sat untouched beside her. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I nodded. You said we need to discuss Jason. Claire folded her hands together. For several seconds, she seemed unsure where to begin. Then she opened a folder and slid several pages across the table. Unlike previous documents, these were not medical records. They were calendars, appointment schedules, travel logs, work itineraries. I spent months trying to understand why certain dates kept matching, she explained. I examined the pages carefully. Multiple entries were highlighted. Some belonged to Jason. Others matched dates I recognized from Megan's paperwork. The overlap was undeniable. This is what convinced you? I asked. Claire nodded. At first. I noticed the wording immediately. At first. Meaning you are not convinced anymore? Claire looked down at the table. That is the problem. She hesitated. The more information I gathered, the less certain I became. Her answer surprised me. For weeks, she had seemed confident, focused, determined. Now, uncertainty had entered the conversation. Why? I asked. Claire exhaled slowly. Because the facts stopped supporting a simple explanation. That statement echoed something Megan said the previous night. Nothing about this situation was simple. Claire pointed towards several dates on the calendar. Look closely. I did. Initially, the entries seemed ordinary. Then I noticed something strange. On multiple occasions, Jason appeared scheduled elsewhere during portions of the same time periods Claire originally believed connected him to Megan. The realization hit me gradually. The timeline was not as clean as it first appeared. Certain assumptions required details that no longer fit. You found contradictions, I said. Claire nodded. A lot of them. Silence settled between us. For the first time since meeting her, I sensed genuine frustration. Not because she lacked information, because she had too much information pointing in different directions. Eventually, she leaned forward. Ryan, I still believe there are things neither of us have been told. Her voice remained steady. But I am no longer convinced the story is what I originally thought. The admission changed everything. If Claire herself doubted her conclusions, then the foundation beneath weeks of suspicion suddenly felt unstable. We spent nearly an hour reviewing records, comparing dates, and discussing inconsistencies. By the end, one fact became clear. Megan and Jason shared a connection. That connection was real. The question was whether the connection meant what everyone initially assumed. As I prepared to leave, Claire stopped me. There is one more thing. I turned back toward her. She reached into her bag and removed a single sheet of paper. I found this yesterday. I accepted it carefully. The page contained a referral note from a specialist. Several names appeared throughout the document. My eyes moved slowly across the text until they stopped at a detail that instantly caught my attention. Jason's name was listed not as a companion, not as a participant, but as an emergency contact within a broader support network connected to multiple patients. Suddenly, several pieces shifted into place. Not enough to solve the mystery, enough to change its shape. Claire noticed my reaction. That is why I called you. I stared at the document. This changes things. I know. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I folded the paper and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Walking back toward my car, I realized the story was entering a completely different phase. The evidence that once seemed straightforward was becoming more complicated. Assumptions were beginning to collapse. And somewhere beneath weeks of suspicion, secrecy, and fear, the actual truth was finally starting to emerge. The only problem was that none of us knew whether that truth would repair the damage already done or make it impossible to repair anything at all. The drive home felt different than every drive before it. For weeks, I had been moving toward what I believed was a hidden betrayal. Now I was moving toward something far more complicated. The evidence that once seemed obvious no longer pointed in a single direction. Every answer uncovered a new question. Every conclusion revealed another layer beneath it. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was beginning to set behind the trees at the end of our street. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Yet I knew I was carrying information capable of changing everything. Megan was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked inside. A cup of coffee rested beside her. Several pages of paperwork remained spread across the table. She looked up the moment she heard the door open. You met with Claire again. It was not a question. I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I removed the referral document from my jacket and placed it on the table. Megan stared at it immediately. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Where did you get that? She asked quietly. Claire found it. Megan closed her eyes. The reaction lasted only a few seconds, but it told me everything I needed to know. She had seen the document before. Then you finally know part of the truth, she said. I sat across from her. Only part. Megan slowly nodded. That is fair. The evening light filtered through the kitchen windows as silence settled between us. Finally, Megan reached for the document. Her fingers moved across the page until they stopped beside Jason's name. This is what everyone missed. I followed her gaze. Explain it to me. She took a deep breath. Jason was never hiding inside my appointments. I remained silent. He was helping coordinate a patient support network connected to several specialists. The explanation aligned with what Claire had begun discovering, yet it still left gaps. Then why were your schedules overlapping? I asked. Megan looked exhausted. Because multiple consultations were organized through the same network. She paused. Ryan, once Claire noticed our names appearing together, every additional coincidence reinforced her suspicions. I understood the logic. If someone already believed two people were secretly connected, every future detail would seem to confirm that belief. The problem was that I had fallen into the same trap. So had Claire. Maybe even Jason himself. Why did you not tell me any of this sooner? I asked. Megan laughed softly. It was the same sad laugh I had heard before. Because I thought I could manage it. Her eyes filled with emotion. Then the rumors started. Then Claire began asking questions. Then I became terrified that any explanation would sound like an excuse. I looked down at the paperwork. For the first time, I could see how that might happen. The circumstances looked suspicious from the outside. Multiple overlapping appointments. Hidden paperwork. Unexplained phone calls. Delayed conversations. None of it looked good. Then Megan reached into a nearby folder and removed another document. This is what the medical results actually said. She handed it to me. I read carefully. Then I read it again. The realization arrived slowly. The results themselves were surprisingly ordinary. Follow-up testing. Monitoring recommendations. Additional evaluations. Nothing remotely resembling the dramatic possibilities my imagination had created over the past several weeks. Nothing explaining why so many lives had become tangled together. I looked up. This is it. Megan nodded. That is it. The room became very quiet. Weeks of mystery. Weeks of tension. Weeks of suspicion. And at the center sat a collection of paperwork that looked far less dramatic than anyone expected. Yet the emotional damage surrounding those papers was very real. Suddenly my phone vibrated. A message from Claire appeared on the screen. Before opening it, I looked at Megan. She still thinks there is more to this. Megan lowered her eyes. Maybe because there was. That answer caught my attention immediately. What does that mean? Megan stared at the table for several seconds. Then she finally looked at me. It means I should have trusted you from the beginning. Her voice broke slightly. The moment I started hiding things, people started creating their own explanations. I could not argue with that. In the absence of truth, assumptions grow quickly. I had experienced that firsthand. Claire had too. Then I opened the message. It contained only one sentence. I finally spoke to Jason. I stared at the screen. A second message arrived moments later. We need to meet one last time. My pulse quickened. Across the table, Megan saw my expression. What happened? She asked. I slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in weeks, I felt strangely calm. Not because I had all the answers. Because I was finally close enough to see the entire picture forming. Claire had spoken to Jason. The two people standing at the center of the misunderstanding had finally compared their stories. Whatever happened next would either confirm everything or dismantle the remaining suspicions once and for all. And as the last light of evening faded beyond the kitchen windows, I realized the truth was no longer hiding inside medical results. The truth was hiding inside the conversations people avoided having until it was almost too late. The final meeting took place 4 days later. By then, the constant tension that had dominated my life for weeks had begun to fade, replaced by something else. Exhaustion. Not physical exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying uncertainty for too long. Claire chose the same coffee shop where we had met before. This time, however, she was not alone. Jason sat beside her. When I arrived, both of them stood to greet me. The moment felt strange. For weeks, Jason had existed only as a name inside records, schedules, and assumptions. Now he was simply a man sitting across a table. A husband, just like me. We ordered coffee and settled into an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Claire spoke first. I owe both of you an apology. The statement immediately surprised me. Claire looked toward Jason before continuing. After everything we discussed, I finally sat down and compared every document, every timeline, and every conversation without assuming the conclusion beforehand. Jason nodded quietly. And when we did that, he said, a lot of things stopped making sense. I understood exactly what he meant. The same thing had happened to me. Once assumptions enter a story, every new detail seems to support them. The human mind naturally connects dots, even when some of those dots do not belong together. For the next hour, we reviewed everything one final time. The appointments, the referrals, the overlapping schedules, the support network, the medical consultations. Each piece that originally appeared suspicious now fit into a much larger and far less dramatic picture. There had been real secrecy. That much was true. Megan should have trusted me earlier. Jason should have been more transparent with Claire. Both decisions created confusion that never needed to exist. Yet confusion and betrayal are not always the same thing. Somewhere along the way, fear filled the empty spaces where communication should have been. Claire eventually looked directly at me. The medical results were never the story. I nodded slowly. No, they were not. She smiled sadly. They only became important because everyone thought they explained something bigger. That observation captured the entire experience perfectly. The paperwork, the envelope, the records. None of them created the problem. The problem came from the silence surrounding them. Silence invites speculation. Speculation creates narratives. Narratives become beliefs. And beliefs can feel true long before they are proven. After the meeting ended, I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The answers were not dramatic. There was no shocking confession waiting at the end of the road. No explosive revelation. No villain hiding in plain sight. Instead, there was something much more ordinary. Miscommunication. Fear. Delayed honesty. Human mistakes. When I walked through the front door, Megan was sitting on the couch reading a book. She looked up immediately. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she set the book aside. How did it go? I sat beside her and leaned back against the cushions. Complicated. She laughed softly. That sounds about right. I found myself smiling for the first time in what felt like weeks. Then I told her everything. The conversation with Claire. The discussion with Jason. The conclusions we reached. Megan listened quietly. Several times her eyes filled with tears. Not because of new information. Because hearing the entire story spoken aloud finally revealed how unnecessary much of the pain had been. When I finished, silence settled over the room. Yet unlike previous silences, this one felt peaceful. Not tense. Not uncertain. Just quiet. Eventually Megan spoke. I should have trusted you. The words were simple. Honest. Unrehearsed. I looked at her and nodded. Yes. She lowered her eyes. I know. Then I reached for her hand. And I should have asked questions sooner instead of creating answers in my head. Megan looked surprised. You had every reason to be suspicious. Maybe. I shrugged. But suspicion is still not the same thing as truth. That lesson may have been the most important one of all. Looking back now, I understand something I could not see at the beginning. The mystery never revolved around medical results. It never revolved around an envelope. It never even revolved around the names appearing together inside records. The real story was about communication. About how quickly trust begins to weaken when important conversations are delayed. About how easily people construct explanations when information is incomplete. Most importantly, it was about the cost of silence. Weeks earlier, I watched my wife walk through our front door looking exhausted and unwell. At the time, I believed I was witnessing the beginning of a mystery. In reality, I was witnessing the beginning of a misunderstanding that would eventually involve 4 people, countless assumptions, and more emotional strain than any of us expected. Today, the paperwork sits inside a drawer in my home office. The envelope is long gone. The phone calls have stopped. Life has returned to normal. Yet every time I see those documents, I remember the lesson hidden inside them. Facts matter. Evidence matters. But honest conversations matter even more. Because when people stop talking, even ordinary circumstances can begin to look like secrets. And sometimes the most important truth is not hidden inside a medical report. Sometimes it is hidden inside the words people are afraid to say out loud.